Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us again tonight. My name is Anna Withers, and I work with Springfield Community Gardens. We are a nonprofit based in Springfield, Missouri, whose vision is a community where everyone has access to healthy local food. And right now, we operate 16 community gardens, 3 urban farms, a commercial test kitchen, and a community food florist. And this webinar is focused on expanding sales to institutions, and we will focus on the opportunities and considerations with that. It's funded by the Local Foods Promotion Program from the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, because we can all get behind helping with some promotion for our local foods. And we are joined by 2 very good friends to Springfield Community Gardens. They're experts in their fields. One is MU Extension Horticulture Field Specialist Patrick Byers. And we also have Jennifer Hashley, who is the director of the New Entry Sustainable Farming Project in Boston. So we will get to them in just a moment. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that if you do have questions throughout the night, please ask as we go along, and be sure to use the specific Q&A question or the button at the bottom of the screen, because that helps me keep organized with the actual questions we need to answer. But also, if you have a comment you'd like to put in the chat, that is encouraged as well. Once we leave the workshop at the end of the night, a screen will pop up with a link to post-workshop survey. And that survey is used in our reporting to the USDA. It really helps us provide meaningful workshops in the future. We pay a lot of attention to suggestions for different topics and ways that we could present information more clearly. So please take just a couple moments to fill out that survey at the end. And we're really excited to get started tonight because this is an important topic. There have been a lot of new food hubs that have entered the market across the Midwest in the past few years. And unless you work in food systems, I think that's still an unfamiliar term to a lot of people. And there's just a lot of movement happening in the food system right now. And we're waiting on a new farm bill being passed that will change a lot of those important farm bill programs that are there supporting our farmers. And we hope that the discussion tonight can kind of set the scene for farmers who are curious about what it might take to scale up to selling to an institution, such as a food hub, hospital, etc. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Patrick first. Or I'm sorry, let's introduce Jennifer, and then we'll let Patrick start us off. And you're still on mute, Jennifer.
Great, thank you, Anna. It's great to be here tonight. My name is Jennifer Hashley. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of the New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. We are a farmer training program in Massachusetts, in the Boston area, north of the city. And we've been around since 1998, so gosh, 26 years now. And we really started as an organization working with immigrants and refugees who had farming backgrounds and looking to help them transition their farm knowledge into selling in Massachusetts, getting access to land and resources. And one of the first projects that we did after learning, how they understood how to grow their own culturally preferred crops and things like that, one of the challenges was helping them get into different kinds of market channels. And so early on in the program in about 2005, we started what we called then was our World Peas Marketing Collaborative or Marketing Co-op. And then over time, the name of the day became a food hub. So we've been running the New Entry Food Hub since 2005, really as a way to help all beginning farmers. We've expanded our audience since we started originally to all beginning farmers, to help them have a built-in marketing platform as they're getting their businesses up and running. And even as they graduate from our programs and continue to go on and farm on their own in the region, it's always nice to have a friendly buyer. So we help aggregate and distribute from about 36 different farmers a year to multiple market channels. So we sell through a community-supported agriculture program, a box share program. We have a senior share program with a bunch of 5 different senior centers around the area. We also sell to a lot of food access partnerships, so food pantries, feeding programs, soup kitchens, places like that, and we sell to schools and institutions. So we have very diverse market channels, and I think we're going to talk about some of the benefits of selling wholesale and scaling up, and I'm happy to talk more about what our food hub does and how we work with producers who are at different sizes and scales, from just starting to expanding and scaling up, and looking at our food hub as one of their many wholesale market channels. So yeah, excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm Patrick Byers. I'm a horticulture field specialist with University of Missouri Extension, and have worked, for 34 plus years. And really the focus of my programming, both as an extension specialist and also as an outreach specialist in previous jobs, was to help farmers to be profitable and sustainable. And obviously that deserves a strong focus on marketing. And I'm looking forward to tonight's program, sharing it with Jennifer and drawing upon her real life experiences in helping farmers to develop this critically important aspect of their operations. I also wear a second hat, and that is as a produce food safety specialist. And since 2009, I've been working in that arena as well. And of course, it's a nice complement to production horticulture. In the course of our work with produce food safety here in Missouri, we've trained almost 300 farmers in safe production and handling practices. I serve as a lead trainer, so I get a chance to participate in most, if not all, those trainings. And also have had the pleasure of spending time on farm with what's called the On-Farm Readiness Review Program, helping farmers understand the realities of produce food safety on their farms. And we'll be touching on produce food safety and the importance of good practices, both in production, but also particularly in handling and marketing tonight from the standpoint of produce food safety. And so I think Anna and Jennifer, without further ado, we might go ahead and start the program. And what we're going to do basically tonight is we'll first go over some basics of larger scale marketing, wholesale marketing, marketing to larger scale buyers. Then we'll talk about some of the advantages and the challenges of this approach. And Jennifer will lead that discussion. And then we'll finish up with some thoughts on larger scale marketing and produce food safety. And I'll touch on some points there. Now, as we go through this program, all three of us will be bouncing off of each other. I'm sure that, as ideas are presented, we'll all have a perspective to share with that. And then we also look forward to your participation as well. As Anna mentioned, please enter any questions you might have in the Q&A, and we'll tackle those when those come in. Okay, well, why would a farmer consider larger scale marketing? Why would a farmer consider moving beyond local direct market sales? And generally, many farmers, especially beginning farmers, will start with local direct market sales, and for good reason. It's a pretty straightforward arena to enter as a producer. Oftentimes the markets are in place. You don't have to do a whole lot as far as prep. You can enter these markets with a limited quantity of a variety of different produce items. And so those are all advantages. But there are some pretty compelling reasons why a farmer, particularly an established farmer, might want to consider moving up into wholesale marketing. And it basically comes down to two things. First of all, the ability to access different markets. There's just a wealth of opportunity out there from the standpoint of marketing produce. And if we just focus on direct market sales directly to consumers, there's a huge pool of markets that we're not addressing. And then the other idea is the ability to sell a quantity of produce, the idea of being able to focus efforts on the farm and focus those efforts into a channel that can take a quantity of crop. And so those basically are the two things that I think many farmers look at. Now, when we talk about quote unquote wholesale marketing, that is a collective term, and it includes a lot of different potential markets. And certainly there's the traditional wholesale market where a farmer might sell to a broker and then the broker moves that crop onto other channels. But there are also other possibilities within this umbrella. And those could be sales to restaurants, sales to grocery stores, sales to a wide range of institutional markets, be they schools, universities, prisons, hospitals, military installations. These are all possibilities as well. And then the areas that we're going to pay perhaps a little bit of focused attention on, and that would be to aggregators, food hubs, auctions. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of a good starting point. And I wonder, Jennifer, if you had anything you wanted to kind of add to that.
I think sometimes it's interesting, just the terminology that we use as well. A lot of people think about wholesale, being, there's retail and then there's wholesale. And as you just mentioned, all the different types of wholesale. And sometimes it does get a little bit confusing. You might also hear this term intermediated markets. And I think that's another term that pops up in this conversation as well, where people are selling to these other buyers that then may be selling directly to the consumer. So there's only one, kind of producer, intermediate market, consumer, and then the other wholesale brokers that you were mentioning, where it's kind of like you're selling to a broker and then they may distribute to many of those other channels. So you don't really know where the food ends up. And I think when we talk about food safety plans and other things in the future like that, where you're selling and who the end user is has maybe more implications for how could it be recalled or traced back to you as the farmer, depending on where you're selling from. So just to add that too, I think there's lots of names for lots of different kinds of markets.
Yes, that is certainly the case. That's certainly the case. I think, though, another important consideration, you heard Anna discuss the sort of the motto or the mission statement, so to speak, of Springfield Community Gardens. And it was all about access to locally grown food. And the reality, and particularly in my part of Southwest Missouri, is that we're only reaching a portion of the potential market that could be there with locally produced produce if we just focus on direct market sales. And if we're really going to make an impact from the standpoint of a local food system, we need farmers that are willing to step up to address these much larger scale possible markets that are there. And so, sometimes I've had farmers say, well, I've considered it, but, is it really important? And I think the answer is yes. Now, granted, it does come with challenges, and we'll hear more about that a little bit later on tonight, but it certainly can come with rewards as well. When I've visited with farmers who have successfully scaled up to sales at a wholesale level, if we want to call it that, there are some advantages that they mention. Certainly, the ability to move a large quantity of produce. Many farmers that are focused on local direct market sales are diversified farmers, and they're focused on markets that just can't handle a huge quantity of produce. And I'm not really saying anything negative about that approach, because that is a model that works great for many farmers. But when farmers are interested or looking at maximizing the income potential from a farm, frequently the discussion turns to efficiency. And how can we make the everyday activities on a farm focused on a process that is efficient, both from the standpoint of production, but also from the standpoint of marketing? And I think this is where working through wholesale channels really has an opportunity to grow the income potential of a farm. The idea of working under contracts, now that can be a little bit scary, but on the other hand, that also provides a clear understanding of the market situation, both from the standpoint of the producer and from the standpoint of the buyer. And then, of course, in many cases, these contracts include pre-negotiated prices. And this gives a farm a clear idea of the income potential and gives them a target to shoot for from the standpoint of production cost. So that's important too. And I think we'll probably hear more about these as we move on. But those are, again, just some sort of general broad considerations from the standpoint of advantages. Now, on the flip side, the per unit price received through a wholesale channel typically is going to be lower than the per unit price in a direct market setting. And, that's just the reality. Well, that is more than made up for, again, from the standpoint of efficiency of production and the quantity of sales. So it's important for a person who's thinking about scaling up to carefully consider that. Another thing to consider is that oftentimes the payment to the farmer is not immediate. It comes perhaps after a period of time, obviously negotiated in a contract, but in most cases, it's not going to be immediately upon delivery of the crop. There are aspects of business development and business management that farmers will have to become much more involved in. And I've heard many farmers over the years say, well, I got into farming to farm, to grow crops, and I didn't get into farming to sit behind a desk and deal with things like contracts and negotiations, et cetera. But it's important that farmers considering scaling up, recognize the value of those skills, and if they don't have them themselves, perhaps identify someone who can take on that role. Post-harvest requirements. We'll talk about that. There's also requirements related to packaging and deliveries, and there's requirements related to produce food safety, which we'll go into more here in a moment. And finally, farms have to have a well-organized set of records. And, we've been talking about records for years from the standpoint of understanding costs of production and those sorts of things. It's really come to the forefront with produce food safety requirements. But for farms that are thinking about scaling up, you're now in a very business setting, and in a setting that requires careful attention to things, again, such as pricing decisions, such as promises made to clients, et cetera. So, it's important to really think of yourself now as a businessman. And so I shouldn't say businessman, business person. And recognize that if that's not your skill set, find someone who can do that either within your farm or in a hired basis. So I'm curious, Jennifer, any thoughts on those comments?
Yeah, all very true. I mean, I think, certainly understanding your buyer and your business, and even starting at the very beginning, like what are your goals and mission and vision for your business? I liked what you said, Patrick, about, having farmers maybe being willing to step up and out of the retail market where, I think a lot of these buyers at institutions would really love to support local and regional food, but they don't know if they can get the supply that they need from farmers in the region. And so, we think about our food hub as well as like providing that alternative to kind of the industrial food system, if you will, so that, buyers that want to have a relationship with their farmers can do so if they have farmers at scale that are producing the volumes and the quantities that they need. But I think, yeah, it gets a little bit tricky if your systems are not set up in place for scaling, like you said, looking to efficiencies, thinking about how do you maybe choose a few crops that you want to focus on for wholesale at first. I think when we're all doing specialty diversified, vegetables, and we want to grow 40 different things for our farmers markets or our CSA or our farm stands to have a real full basket for our consumers, it's kind of a mind shift mentality to think about wholesaling and scaling. And, I think you don't have to think about how you scale everything that you do, because that can be very overwhelming, but maybe we always encourage our farmers to start with maybe pick 3 to 5 crops of your favorite things that you love to grow that you can do in volume efficiently, that maybe are less labor involved crops or things like that could be in demand, and focus on those to start and put your systems in place to do that with a few crops, and then you can add to your repertoire over time as you build those other systems like record keeping and tracking and all the desk work of creating your wholesale price list and sending it to your customers and following through and developing those contracts and all the things that we can dive into more details around. So yeah, I think starting small and picking a couple crops, and then really focusing on quality and understanding the pricing models and your labor and efficiency and cost of production and all those pieces can be really important and a good way to start.
Yeah, I really
like
couldn't
what
agree
you
more.
said
Go.
about the mindset shift from the big diversified like CSA boxes and everything, because that I could definitely see people biting off more than they can chew. The most common advice I hear from growers to other growers starting out is start small, figure out how to do it well. And everyone says that's the advice they would give, but none of them did it that way. Everybody
Nope.
just tries a million things and sees what works for them in real time. And I think that's just so funny that even though people pick up on a lot of wisdom, that's still kind of the advice that no one takes.
I will say, and again, this was advice given to me by several farms that had successfully moved into wholesale marketing. And, certainly the advice of starting small is helpful, but the reality is you have to scale up to meet the demands of a wholesale market. And as Jennifer said, the idea of moving away from a diversified setting to a specialized setting, makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day and so much production area that you have on a farm. And if your goal is to grow quantity, then you have to specialize. And the other aspect that needs to be mentioned is that, as scaling up takes place, again, you don't want to be caught in the middle where you don't have enough to really address a market. Um, you have to move quickly from smaller to large. But the other thing to consider is that, and I imagine we'll hear more about this in the presentation tomorrow night, but when you think about scaling up, when you think about moving from retail sales to wholesale sales, oftentimes there is more of an emphasis on uniform packaging or cold storage or other aspects that require equipment. And so, there is a financial investment that is necessary here. And, while you're developing your relationship with clients, et cetera, you also need to be developing a relationship with your banker and with your accountant and with others who can help support you in this journey towards a more focused farming operation that, is going to have some financial implications. So, that's something to consider as well. And I remember one farmer who had just purchased a grading line, and it was an expensive purchase, but he showed me his business and marketing plan and how this purchase was going to again be an important part of his scaling up journey. And he was willing to take that risk. And several years later, he was successfully addressing a wholesale market using that equipment, and he had paid it off. And so it was a good investment, but it can be a little daunting up front and a little scary to make that move from retail sales into a wholesale market.
I would
Okay.
also comment really quick that, we're talking about scaling and possibly hiring staff to fill in gaps for things you need to delegate and everything. But I do know several farmers personally, where it's still just two people, like a husband and wife, or two people co-operating a farm who are able to do that and meet those demands. So don't feel like you have to go from, just yourself or yourself and a helper to a staff of 10 or something necessary.
True.
It all really depends on how you like to farm and what your goals are. And if you enjoy the CSA process and everything, if you enjoy those direct to consumer sales and that's part of what makes farming meaningful to you, consider that. But yeah, I just wanted to make that note before moving on.
No, it's important to recognize that. And many farms don't move beyond retail sales, local direct market sales, and that's just fine. That's a niche that we need filled as well.
Mhm.
But of course, tonight we're here to talk about moving to other markets. But no, that your point is well taken, Anna. Thank you. Um, just to give you a kind of a case study, several years ago, I worked with a farmer who didn't have a large land base. It was I think he had perhaps 10 acres of land to work with. He had a diversified farm and several family members involved in the farm. But there was a discussion among members of the farm that, first of all, they were interested in more focused efforts on the farm, and secondly, they heard of some opportunities to address some larger scale markets. And the crop that they were considering was garlic. And garlic has several attributes that actually lend itself well to larger scale marketing. It's a durable product. It can be marketed through a variety of wholesale channels, and it does. There are several specialized pieces of equipment, but it can be from the standpoint of harvest and post-harvest handling, can be managed in a pretty traditional setting. And so, this farm made the move in the course of 1 year, moving from I think 30 crops to one crop, which was garlic. And this sounds a little scary, but the farm had a marketing plan in place, a business plan in place. They had developed a relationship with uh, a grocery store that they were marketing through. They were also doing online sales. Garlic, again, is a durable product, so it lends itself to online sales. And as far as specialized equipment, they had to purchase a garlic transplanter, and that's fairly pricey piece of equipment. But 4 years in, they had successfully made the transition, and again, we're focused on a single crop on their farm. And yes, that is a bit risky from the standpoint of situations that can impact a crop on the farm, but they were very happy with the transition that they had made to that approach. So again, that's just an example of a case study. There are many others I'm sure that Jennifer and I could bring forth. But I was curious, Jennifer, if you had any sort of case studies or examples that you might bring forth.
Yeah, I think, we have one farmer in particular who worked on a much larger wholesale farm. And so he kind of came to us with a lot of production experience. And then when he was on our incubator program for 3 years, really kind of delved into growing, the full market basket of 40 different crops. I always use that example because he wanted to do a CSA and sell at a farmer's market and kind of do his own business. It's one thing transitioning from working on a farm for someone else. And then he's like, well, I want to start where I feel like I can meet my own goals and start small, because he didn't have all the specialized equipment and pack sheds and all these other things. He was starting on his own. And then I think as he realized, the difference of having mechanization and efficiency and trying to balance and learn all the different crops to manage that kind of diversity, when he left the program after 3 years and leased land in central Massachusetts, now he's kind of going back to more of a wholesale kind of approach, and like I said, picking a few crops that he's really good at and then really targeting his market to achieve those. And I think part of one of your other points that you made, Patrick, around, you really have to meet the volume and quantity that the wholesalers might want. He also kind of went into it knowing what his land base was going to be and had built some relationships through our program with other suppliers in the area. So he's able to work with other farms to aggregate, if he has an order for something and he doesn't have the full volume himself, and he's able to reach out to other producers to meet that volume need. Because they, if you have other friends and farmer friends that are growing similar crops and are also thinking about scaling at the same time, sometimes that's a nice way to kind of grow into it if you can't do it all at once. It's hard to go from an acre to 10 acres overnight because that is a lot of capital investment. But if you can partner with other folks, or like I said, pick a few crops and then scale into that. That was really successful for him as well, because he, after 3 years of running around to all kinds of markets and doing CSA planning and intensive crop everything, I think he realized he much preferred the business model of being able to also think about your time and your lifestyle and your values. For if you personally love that direct to consumer relationship and pieces of that, there are elements you can build with a wholesale buyer. Whether it's a restaurant or a small grocery store or something like that, but it can also save you a lot of time in your personal life. When you think about your market channel assessment, I'm happy to share one of those tools if we want to spend some time thinking about how can you assess, the whole picture of like, where do I really want to be putting my effort? CSA, farmers markets, wholesale, as you're maybe shifting from one market to another, thinking about making changes or putting together a diversified marketing strategy. So I think, do you want to free up your time from running around to different farmers markets, or if you're doing deliveries with your CSA customers or that on-farm pickup, a wholesale opportunity, can mean that, yes, you may make less per pound or per unit, but you can deliver a whole lot at once and be done. And it can be more transactional, which could be good because it can free you up to have more time to spend with your family or to work on other aspects of your business, or to, figure out how to become more efficient on the farm. So I just think of that particular farmer who kind of went full spectrum from starting on a wholesale farm as a worker, starting his own farm, very diversified, and then ending back up in wholesale just because of it made more sense for his lifestyle and how he wanted to run his farm business.
Well, just to close out this first section, just some tips that farmers have given me over the years. Obviously, the importance of a business and marketing plan really can't be stressed enough. Learn as much as you can about the market. As Jennifer mentioned in her example, here's a farmer that spent some time in wholesale production before jumping in themselves. Discuss market needs with potential buyers. Sometimes you don't know what's there until you ask. If you want a rough idea what pricing is, and sometimes you can get that during the course of your market discussions, but to get a rough idea, you can check out USDA terminal markets for just a rough idea of what crops are worth on the wholesale market. Again, remember that you're a farmer, but you're also a business person at this point. And then remember the emphasis on quality, and certainly that's important in a retail setting, but it's critically important to develop and maintain relationships in a wholesale setting. So things such as proper cold storage, post-harvest handling, all those sorts of things become really important. Okay, I think now pass the baton to Jennifer for the next section.
Yeah, so just building on, I don't know if it makes sense. I'm happy to share a couple of challenges and logistics and things to think about with wholesale marketing, but also I did put in the chat, and I don't know if you want to share it to everyone. Patrick just mentioned the terminal market prices. So I think that is one of the areas where a lot of times direct market farmers are really concerned about, oh, am I going to, how do you make that kind of mental shift between getting the full retail value for your crops and then thinking about wholesale prices, and where do you even begin to start pricing that? And so, yeah, the terminal market, there's a link there. And I would imagine you guys are closest to maybe the Atlanta, Georgia market. I don't know, Patrick, if that's kind of your go-to terminal market pricing strategy.
Yes, that would be a good place to check.
Great. Awesome. So yeah, there's a link there, and you can click on that and get daily updates, which is quite interesting. I always like to tell farmers too that I use that as like, kind of this should be your floor of where you start, and certainly your cost of production need to drive your pricing, and certainly any other factors, and you have the local, which is a value add, any other story that you can tell can hopefully drive that up. At least you'll know probably what your future buyers, your wholesale buyers are paying or around about that from their current distributors or other suppliers. So I think some of the considerations for selling wholesale, Patrick's mentioned many of them already, but certainly food safety is going to be one of the big pieces that a wholesale buyer is going to pay attention to if they have certain requirements about that. And I think we're going to spend more time on that a little bit later on, so I won't go into that now. But I think a lot of the things that are really important to think about, that communication piece is huge. When you find the buyers that you might be interested in working with, really getting clear on what kind of crop quality, varieties, very specific, features do they want? How do they want it, produced and stored and transported and boxed? And do they need to have grading and labeling and all of the logistical pieces? And are you set up for that? And where do you go to find that information? So I think that can be a little bit daunting for new producers to think about, well, how many units go in a case, and how many, what does it need to look like? What are bunch sizes? What are grading standards? What are the uniform, sizes and things that I need to think about? And so there are some manuals out there that I think are really helpful that have a lot of that information in them. Happy to put that link in the chat as well. The Family Farms did a great wholesale success manual many years ago and did a lot of trainings around the country on it. And they have a 300-page guide with all of the details around scaling up and selling to wholesale. And a lot of that are each of the individual crops listed and all the considerations for how they need to be packaged and graded and labeled. Obviously, talking to your buyer is important, but if you're looking for some basic standards, that's an excellent resource to look at. So recommend that. And I think one of the biggest things too is quality. When you choose the variety and selection and things that your buyer is interested in, and you can figure out the pricing that works for both of you. I think really paying attention to all the quality pieces from the soil to delivery, right? Like growing the quality crop is number one, and that obviously you need to pay attention to all the fertilizer in your soil and your organic soil management or compost, all of those things to grow a healthy crop. And then every step of the way, from training yourself and your staff about proper harvest, when do you harvest the crop, how you harvest it, how do you get the field heat out of it right away? How do you clean it, prepare it, package it, trim it? All of those things are so important, because if you're starting a new relationship with a wholesale buyer and you're delivering product that does not meet their quality standards, that's going to be a really hard relationship to maintain. And if you've invested a whole lot of resource into scaling and growing large volumes of a particular crop and you can't deliver on the quality, it's really going to hurt your success in that way. And we see that a lot in the food hub when we're, getting product in from 36 different farms every week. It's, and we're trying to aggregate ourselves from multiple producers to meet a wholesale buyer's requirement. And if the quality is all over the place, like some people leave long stems, some people have short stems, some people have, flea beetle damage and holes in their leaves. Some didn't pay attention to soil fertility and their leaves are yellowing in the boxes. Like those are all really hard things to overcome with buyers, because they might give you one chance or two chances, and then that's it. They're not going to purchase from you again. So make sure all your systems are in place. And as you scale and you may start hiring your own labor, I think we've seen that with a lot of our beginning farmers where, they're now having someone else do some of the work. And if they haven't trained that person well and passed on that quality standard, sometimes things slip through when you're doing large volume, many, many cases. The first few cases we open might look nice, and then we get to the fourth or fifth case and realize someone didn't tell somebody that this needs to be consistent case after case after case. So I think those are some of the big picture things that are, really important, and thinking about, how do you do the crop planning that you need to do so that when you commit to those quantities over a period of time, usually a wholesale buyer wants to have reliable supply from you week after week after week. How do you do your crop planning and have those successions in place so that you can keep that volume and consistency going over the course of the growing season, depending on what the crop is. So, those are some things I think are really important, and just making sure, again, that communication is so clear with the buyer. If you're going to have an issue or a quality issue or a timing issue or a consistency issue, they're depending on you if you've made an agreement to fulfill their market channel needs as well, or their restaurant, their food service goals and things like that. So if you're going to fall short, it's really, really important to communicate that up front, and obviously not do that too many times, or you may not have that customer anymore. But we have that happen a lot too, where things happen on the farm and things are not, we try to do crop planning months and months in advance for a consistent, reliable purchasing pattern with the farmers. And sometimes, the Mother Nature throws us a curveball and things are slower to harvest, or, they come in early and we're not prepared. So those are all risk factors, I think, when you're scaling up. If you have, a whole crop of something that's a few weeks late, is that buyer still going to be there if you miss the kind of harvest window that they were expecting? Or if it comes early, are they ready to buy it from you before the timing was set? So I'll just pause there. Patrick, I don't know if you have anything else to add about logistics.
Well, I do want to add just a bit to your comments on crop planning. I mean, it's so important when we think about the needs of a wholesale market. And one of those needs, unfortunately, is, well, not unfortunately, but durability, and the ability to take a crop at harvest and move it through the channels to the consumer. Again, there's probably going to be a longer period of time from when it's harvested to when it reaches the consumer. And it's very critically important that that crop, first of all, be well grown. Secondly, that it be handled properly upon harvest and throughout to post-harvest, that it be stored if possible, under cold storage or whatever the optimum conditions are for storing the crop, and that it be handled properly as it leaves the hands of the farmer and moves into the wholesale channels. And, some of these decisions are decisions that have to be made well before, the crop goes into the ground. And just to give you an example, blackberries, in fact, berries in general, blackberries in particular, are in high demand for wholesale channels in Missouri. And we have some farmers who are addressing that demand. Well, one of the requirements is that the berries be firm enough to have a shelf life of at least 5 to 7 days. And for this to work, you have to choose the right cultivars. Just to give you an example, there's a fabulous blackberry cultivar called Natchez. Large berries, productive, but unfortunately, the berries are just a little bit too soft to make it to that 5 to 7 day window that's needed for a wholesale market. Fabulous berries for local direct market sales, where the berries are marketed immediately upon harvest. But farmers would need to look towards a cultivar that had firmer berries to stand up to wholesale marketing. So again, a decision that must be made before the blackberry plants are ordered and even planted in the field. So again, paying attention to the needs of the market from the standpoint of the characteristics of the crop is really important too. But yeah, I just wanted to add that to your comments, Jennifer.
I would say too, another example that we have a lot of challenges with are tomatoes, wholesale tomatoes, because producers inevitably, again, goes back to crop selection, variety selection, really love to grow the different heirloom tomatoes and things that are, wonderful to eat, very fresh tasting, great, fresh market tomato. But for wholesale, like, you have to know when to harvest those, harvest them at the right time to hold up. Exactly as you said, Patrick, from the time that you pick them, how they're going to be laid out in the containers that you're harvesting them into, shipped, delivered, in and out of trucks, on the shelf, and then what is the wholesale buyer going to do with them after that? Because we often get tomatoes that are picked at the peak of ripeness, which do not have any shelf life, and then they start to crack and ooze and do all kinds of things. Or if the plants are not well maintained in the field either and start to show signs of disease, that starts to manifest itself after harvest and throughout that chain. And so we end up with a lot of tomatoes that we have to reject from farmers, and it always breaks my heart. It's just like, oh, where did it go wrong? Was it the plant health? Was it they picked it too soon? Was it the variety selection? So all those things are so super important, especially if you're going to be investing acres and acres of a particular crop. That
right.
You need to get those things right.
Another thing that and you mentioned this as well, and I just wanted to give an example, but the idea of the demands of the market from the standpoint of packaging and labeling, and obviously this is a discussion point to be had with the markets that are being approached. But I remember early in my career working with a wholesale strawberry grower, and this grower on that particular day that I was visiting the farm was picking fruit for 8 different markets. Each market had a different requirement from the standpoint of the size of the packaging and a different requirement from the standpoint of the labeling. And so, this farm was ready to do that, but it does definitely make the logistics a bit more complicated from that standpoint if a farm is addressing more than one wholesale market. So, that's a consideration. And then another consideration before we scare everyone away from the idea of scaling up is that it is possible in specialized situations to develop essentially wholesale relationships with, for example, restaurants, where you can be working with crops that perhaps are more perishable, like those heirloom tomatoes that you mentioned, or the blackberries that I mentioned. And, they would be delivered to the chef, who would then use the product quickly. And in fact, some cases, the restaurant may actually be interested in these specialized products that aren't available through their other wholesale channels that they purchase from for the needs of the restaurant. So, there are opportunities there, but again, durability and is an important characteristic to some degree.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think setting up your systems in place to have that frequent communication is really important as well. I know, when we worked with a lot of restaurants too, they're very busy people, and a lot of the wholesale buyers that you may work with as well, they're dealing with a lot of different sourcing from a lot of different vendors. And so I think as you're newly getting into working with wholesale buyers, it's really important to have, to overly communicate and to set up the systems where you can keep yourself in front of those buyers frequently, because oftentimes when we've worked with schools and institutions, we're asking them to go outside of their normal ordering channels, right? Certainly a school or institution, they've got their wholesale distributors, they're in their system that's standardized, the list comes out at the same time every week, they fill out the order, they even have it pre-populated in their ordering system, and boom, they're done. So to ask a buyer like that, when you're developing a new relationship, to go onto your own online ordering platform, or if you're sending them by email and asking them to email their order back to you, or whatever your system that you're going to set up is, you have to remember that you're asking them to do more work than they've already maybe been doing, or changing their ordering systems. So being really consistent about, communicating what your availability is, the quantities that you have, following up, in developing the invoicing, having a system for tracking all of that, I think is really, really important. And when, like Patrick was saying, different buyers are going to have different needs for different crops, different needs for different kinds of communication, and having those, thinking through what those communication channels are going to be, and then setting up those ordering and follow through and invoicing systems is also kind of a next level of the business side of things that I think a lot of times can be underestimated in how you do that. And then certainly having, as Patrick mentioned at the beginning, if your new wholesale buyers are going to have different payment terms than you're used to for cash flow purposes, do you have systems in place to track those invoices and payments and when the check comes in? Because when we've worked with many restaurants before, and they're notorious for paying as late as they possibly can because they may be having their own cash flow issues. And so, or different institutional buyers may have different payment terms, and what are your payment terms? You as the farmer can set those. Do you want to be paid on delivery? Do you want net 15, net 30, net 45? People will take a longer term to pay your invoices as long as you give it. I know one of our grain flours in our state, they had gotten burned by so many restaurants not paying. They required their accounts to set up a line of credit and pay on delivery because they didn't want to be holding on to that cash flow, for many months and then having, places close up and never getting paid. So thinking about, how you want to set up those kind of back end systems, I think are another whole piece of scaling up to wholesale.
And we did get a question that came in on scaling up. It's a little bit more related to the production side versus managing, some more of the administrative work. But there is a person who is considering, scaling up to wholesale, and they're wanting to focus on culinary herbs, garlic, and peppers. And they've been doing some research that has led them to expect an ROI of an employee to be around $12,000 a year. So if they're paying a seasonal employee $6,000, so half of that for part of the season, they're not seeming to meet that ROI. So they want advice. So that's a whole separate thing, is the ROI on actually making the commitment to hiring some farm workers. I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming it's a farm worker. And their question is, if there's one piece of farm equipment that you would suggest that would be essential for an employee to bridge that gap of ROI, like what should they invest in? And yes, it is a farm worker.
Why don't you tackle that, Jennifer, and I'll add.
Well, oh gosh, I'm just trying to think of what would be an
You've hired a lot of farm workers in your life, Jennifer.
Yes, I know. I'm just trying to think of like a piece of equipment for peppers, garlic, and culinary herbs in particular. That's kind of tricky.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know enough about do you already have a tractor? Like, are you thinking about, going from maybe hand scale to walk behind tractor to, some kind of, 65 horsepower tractor? Like, how much more land are you looking to put into production? Because I think about hand labor and an employee versus mechanized labor. And then, are you looking at, equipment and then cultivating equipment?
They have a tractor, but no attachment except a bush hog.
So
and actually, I could let this person speak probably, unless they really wouldn't want to.
I think, again, Jennifer's comments about, what scale are you dealing with are really important because, and I know this is arbitrary, but somewhere up to 10 acres, you can do much of the operations with a walk behind tractor. And moving up to it sounds like you may already have a tractor. And with that in mind, then probably some sort of a bed shaper would be helpful. From the standpoint of the garlic, it would be really nice from the standpoint of efficiency to have a lifter at harvest time. A transplanter, is pretty specialized for garlic. It's not a piece of equipment that you could then use to transplant, like herb transplants or other things. So, you would want to carefully consider that, although it can make planting garlic, a much funner, I don't think that's a word, a much more enjoyable operation. But Jennifer, you probably have more experience with culinary herbs.
I would say too, I don't know if you have a plastic mulch layer, if you're into using plastic, depending on your production system, but just thinking about what could be versatile for both herbs and peppers. A lot of our farmers who do culinary herbs use ground cloth, and they just put, they may have a bed shaper, make the raised beds. And again, I don't know your soil type or whether that's, something that you need to do, but they'll make raised beds and furrows and then put ground cloth over it and then burn holes in it and use that for several years for their perennial culinary herbs. But then for more the annual herbs, you can grow right into plastic mulch. And that's what I would suggest for the peppers as well, to prevent, weeds if you're not already doing that. So having the bed shaper and the plastic mulch layer could save a lot of labor on weeding. And so could the ground cloth and fabric. And then for garlic, I think the undercutter for harvesting, and then having that nice clove transplanter would be really helpful. But yeah, I don't know what scale it is that you're looking at. And presumably you already have a refrigeration cooler. I mean, maybe you could get away with that for wholesale with peppers and culinary herbs if you're selling. You don't necessarily always need to refrigerate those depending on how quickly you're selling them. Maybe that wouldn't be the first investment I would do to save time and labor, but
And
yeah,
garlic, particularly for sales fairly soon after curing, doesn't require cold storage either.
yeah,
Yeah, that's an interesting mix of crops.
yeah,
It would be just again a really fun exercise to sit down and look at each crop and then figure out how they would mesh together from the standpoint of efficiency. And then
yeah.
once you understand that, then look at ways that you can improve, in a way that it improves at least two of the three crops and not all three crops as you consider future investments.
I think a high tunnel as well. When I think about climate change and just, if you're trying to, we've started doing almost all of our tomatoes now in high tunnels and not even doing
Hmm.
field tomatoes. And same thing with peppers in some ways, because we just want to get them fully ripe to red. And in our, variable growing season here in Massachusetts, which I think might be similar to Missouri, sometimes it's hard to get quality peppers fully ripe. So then you end up with a lot of green peppers that haven't fully ripened by the time you get the first frost. And that growing them in a high tunnel, hopefully you can keep the the fly maggot out of them and a little bit better, and or get them to ripen a little bit sooner as well, maybe capture those shoulder market seasons.
Yeah, and the same suggestion would apply to the culinary herbs as well, where the appearance of the herbs is important. And in my experience with herbs like basil, dill, and some of the perennial herbs, the quality is better in a tunnel environment compared to the open field. So maybe a high tunnel is in your future.
And definitely check out NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service at USDA, with their Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the EQIP grants. You can get a cost share for a high tunnel, if you apply and get accepted for that, which is a really great cost savings in that regard. So I wondered if you wanted to look at, I know you asked me to kind of cover maybe the market channel assessment tool, and I'm happy to go through that if that makes sense now. Just to think about, weighing your options. And again, I just wanted to put a caveat in that this is a presentation that folks from Cornell University do through their baskets to pallets. I was going to say ballots to baskets. Baskets to pallets curriculum, which is they developed a few years ago to really help farmers think about how do you scale up from smaller quantities, or how do you think about all of your different market channels and choose which one makes sense. So they developed this really cool tool, and I'll just kind of give you an overview of it if it's helpful to think about how you might kind of think about what crop mixes you would be interested in, and how do you make those kind of decisions, what information should you track and things like that. So I'm happy to go through their presentation and share that here. Let me just get into slideshow mode. How is that? Can you see that slideshow now? All right, perfect. So again, full transparency, this is not my presentation, but one that came from the Baskets to Pallets curriculum. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Matt LaRue, who's a marketing specialist now at the Cornell Dyson Center. He has been kind of one of the pioneers of market channel assessment tools for both livestock and meat industry, as well as fresh produce and direct market industry. So he's given a lot of presentations on this. So a lot of this is coming from his work. So yeah, thinking about all the different market channels that you can choose from, there's plenty of opportunity. And how do you decide and choose from those? This is kind of a cute little cartoon. If you bring your vegetables to the market, you can sell all this, get all these great prices and make $500 an hour. Okay, good, that sounds great. But then you have to think about what are all of your actual costs to sell at those market channels. But it takes your labor and your time and your market fees and all that. I think sometimes it's only 1 hour a week, and if it rains and nobody shows up, and it takes 12 hours to harvest and load up all your stuff in your truck and get to the market and stand there all day, and you don't know what you're going to sell. Sometimes we think that it's we're making so much money at these farmers market channels or through our CSA, but we don't account for all the time that is involved in doing that. So this is just a little overview all these competing factors that can affect the performance. You know, your pricing and the profit. How much are you actually making? I think Patrick was just mentioning it'd be cool to do an enterprise budget on, you know, on your garlic and your herbs and your peppers and see what those look like, and then what are the associated costs of both growing and selling. So you've got your price and profit, but then the cost of actually selling, that opportunity cost, and how much volume are you selling, for how much time is it taking you at those different markets, and the labor it requires, you know, from both traveling to the markets, but standing at the markets or dealing with, you know, the customer interaction and things like that. And what is the risk at those different market channels? So those are the things that are all kind of competing in terms of your time. And then we talked about earlier, what do you enjoy doing? Do you really enjoy going to the markets? Is it your social time off the farm, and that's where you interact with your other farmer friends and customers, and you know, you feel less alone? Those are really important considerations as well if you're thinking about changing your market channels. And so thinking about which one is best, you know, again, we've been talking about different factors. You know, some channel might do really well, like you might be able to sell a lot of volume, high volume in a wholesale market, but it might be at a lower price. Direct to market, you might get a really high price, but not sell as much. So what channels are best to meet those goals? And it can be a moving target across all of those different things that we've been talking about this evening, like around, you know, maybe you need to grow a lot of diversity of crops and have a lot of customer interaction and get a high price with direct markets. But, you know, you also aren't moving as much, and you can have a lot less consistency, sorting, packaging, and quality issues if you're selling direct compared to wholesale, where, you know, maybe you choose a few things, not so much interaction, lower price, but you can move a lot of volume, and you still need to make a lot of high standards. Standards need to be met. So the way that they help farmers think about doing a market channel assessment, this is their methodology, is take a period of time for a typical, maybe it's a typical peak season week, or you want to pick a certain crop. There was another couple in New York that used to always do kind of how they set their pricing workshops. And they would say they would literally pick a week during the year, and they would time every task that they did on their crop to try to get their production costs. So this is asking you to collect your marketing labor for your market channels. So all the things that you do to get ready for market for that particular week, and of all your different marketing channels, from harvest to sale for a typical week. And then thinking about collecting the gross sales from those different market channels, how far are you driving to deliver, set up, all of that stuff. Then they have a ranking on your lifestyle and risk, and then they weight that to help you think through what does that look like. And so why the labor logs? Obviously, it's the largest marketing expense. You can have a consistent unit and format, and then you can tell yourself and any labor that you have to hire, you know, to complete the forms, and then everybody fills out their sheets, and you can get a good sense of like how much time you are spending to market to those different market channels. So here was an example that they used of a different labor log, you know, the employee's name, you know, the time spent to the nearest 15 minutes, which vegetables, you know, what were they doing when they were doing that, and then where was the product going to be sold. So that way they could check how much time spent on all these different activities related to those particular crops. And then, yeah, there's lots of different things from harvesting to packing, travel, and sales time. So keeping track of all those things throughout the week for that crop. And then they would use that data to rank and compare those channels, whether you're thinking about CSA, farmers markets, wholesale, you know, what would be your gross sales minus your labor and mileage cost to those different market channels, the labor hours required, and then how much of that did you actually sell of those crops. And then again, there's another ranking for the risk perception and the lifestyle piece of it. So here were some examples of what this could look like if you were to map out your own different marketing channels across your business, and thinking about sales volume by channels. Maybe you're moving more things through your CSA. Your different farmers markets are going to have different volume and sales and gross sales, you know, numbers across each of those. And then you look at the labor hours involved. Of course, even though you're selling more volume, it's still taking you more time for some of the markets. So that's interesting to look at. And then you can you know, create some charts based on their formulas to see comparing labor hours and gross sales, and how does that look, you know, across your market channels. You can also look at profitability. with your, valuing your labor in there. And then these were some of the questions around, rating your risk and your lifestyle factors. And so you would weight that and take all of those things into account. And then you could get your average final scores based on these factors in the study that you did over the course of a week, to kind of help you look and assess what makes the most sense based on all the things that you just looked at, from sales to labor time to time, profitability, risk, lifestyle. And could you look at this chart and see, well, which ones might still be worth your while to keep, or which ones might you want to think about reducing? So if you're going to make some changes, how do you think about that? You might want to reduce the time that you're spending in your weakest performing market channel and increase your participation in the best performing market channel, or maybe some combination thereof. Maybe, again, for certain crops, you want to do more wholesale because of the time and effort that it takes for the volume that you can produce and sell versus, other channels. So these are just some other assumptions that are okay if you don't have all the high level of detail. You can think about what your inventory was at these markets at the start and end. Is there any wasted product? Exact produce weights, all that kind of stuff. And I think this was something about, if you're thinking about, scaling up or looking at maybe some other wholesale channels, like you have some negotiating ability on your own when you're talking with buyers about how the frequency of deliveries, how often do you need to make them. So you have some control on those things. Other things about, are you really set up to move your market channels to different kinds of configurations? Thinking about the efficiency, we were talking about not just like labor efficiency in the field, but also your wash station setup and post-harvest efficiency if you're going to scale up, and understanding pack sizes and order minimums and pricing. So yeah, this is just another kind of graphic that they had around the different prioritized, how do you think about what are some of your steady market channels? And if you have extra, can you be developing some secondary priority channels based on the assessment that you did, thinking about, again, your returns and time and profitability. And so again, in summary, just trying to think through your goals and lifestyle preferences, marketing costs and returns, value your time across all your market channels. And it may be that you can make more money wholesaling and get more time back if you have the right systems in place. And maybe, again, some combination thereof to reduce your risk. So you're not putting all your crop into maybe one garlic crop. That seems risky, but it can work. But maybe they had different market channels, even with just that one crop at scale. So this is a free download. It walks you through all the quick steps that I just ran through very quickly, talking about how to sell, and gives you all the exercises that you can do to go through the different worksheets. And I think this is just a nice summary that I pulled out of that guide, to value your time. I think we see that over and over again with our beginning farmers, when they're trying to do everything themselves. You want to be able to get to the point in your business at some point that you're working on your business and not in your business. And so thinking about valuing your time so that you can afford to, replace yourself with a paid employee as you scale up. So, that has to be factored into the marketing pieces as well. How much time does it take to go and service those different market channels? And then Patrick mentioned earlier, keeping good records so you can make informed decisions. And then, keeping all these factors in play for your channel decisions that we just talked about, and then comparing them and coming back to it as you're looking to make changes in your business. That could be something maybe you do annually or every few years as you're thinking about, making changes. And then, we already looked at that. And then just to reiterate, I guess, some expectations of wholesale buyers that we talked about before. I think, again, high quality, clean product, good communication, proper packing and sorting, and deliveries and consistency. So I think that was the end of the market channel assessment tool. I had a couple slides here about the terminal pricing. This is what it looks like when you go to that website, and you can click on the Georgia one to see the vegetables. And then there's a grading guide also that's online you can find if you're going to need to find those kind of standards for your different crops. And then I just wanted to mention another resource that Farm Commons has around developing wholesale agreements and contracts. So I think that's something else we didn't talk a lot about yet, but there are some resources out there to help you think through what should go into a hopefully a contract with a wholesale buyer. And I know we didn't say it exactly, but sometimes it is hard to get a contract with a wholesale buyer. Sometimes people don't want to put things in writing. We've found that true with a lot of our relationships with wholesale buyers. And I think that's can be scary if you're a new producer scaling up and putting a lot of investment into capital equipment, things like that, not having an agreement in writing for what you expect them to buy from you, what the terms are, the pricing, and all those considerations is really, really important. So that's it. I'll stop sharing. Just wanted to make sure I covered that, and I don't know if there are
I
questions
was
about that.
writing
You
down
had
those
anything?
links. They're in the chat now.
Oh,
So
thank you.
I didn't know about the marketing channel assessment tool, but that is really, really cool. That's a great way of
Yeah,
looking at
agreed.
it and
Yeah, very
actually
useful.
guiding people through looking at those hard numbers.
And I couldn't find it online. I'm going to have to email Matt, but I thought he used to have a cool little Excel sheet that you could actually put in some of your data around hours and mileage, and it would actually calculate, and you could compare that. So if you were tracking that information, there was like a little enterprise budget that would auto calculate some of that. So if I find it, I will definitely send it to you. I'll email him and ask him if he still has a current version of that that we could share with folks.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. And it did touch on some of those labor points too, a little bit. Which now I have that question stuck in my head about, the ROI and just looking at, that's a really hard decision to make is
Oh,
at what
yes.
point, you understand that another set of capable hands can add a lot more revenue, but calculating what that is and when it's time to do it, that's a very tough decision. So if you have any other resources for maybe looking at that and considering when to hire labor, I'm sure that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I feel like that's a huge question. I feel like we're one of the proposals that we're working on right now is to try to dive into that more. If we get the funding, we're going to try and develop a whole program about how do you figure that out? Because
Oh,
we work with a lot
nice.
of very early stage beginning farmers that are like, yeah, when can I afford to hire someone? It's like, well, are you keeping records at all on your business yet?
Right.
Like that's step one. Like you have to know like
Yeah.
where is the money coming from, which crops are most efficient, how are you going to use that labor to continue to generate more revenue. And if you don't know where you are now, it's really hard to answer that question if someone else is going to help you increase your ROI or just suck away all the profits that you have. And can you find someone that's going to be good and work hard and be efficient and, be well trained? And I think that's another key challenge is those people are not always easy to find.
Mhm. Numbers tell a really important story, and it is a lot of the time, not the most fun part of farming, perhaps like the record keeping and everything. You could look at it like, oh, job well done. Look at me. Look at what we're doing on paper. But sometimes once you actually sit down and run some calculations and things pop out at you and you're like, why am I spending all of my time, trying to maybe grow broccoli and it's in the ground for so many or whatever it is. But numbers really do tell a story, and we can't encourage farmers enough to, at least do your baseline record keeping. It'll help you in the end.
Yeah, I know. I think we all think that we can do so many things in our head. And it's just, when you add all the variables of, again, 40 different crops times all the different things you have to know about them and all the things that happen on a daily basis, much less a weekly basis, much less a monthly basis. Like you can't just sit down at the end of the year and remember everything that happened to make your best decisions for the following year if you weren't tracking it as you go. One of our farmers had a really creative way of record keeping. I mean, she just took so many photos. I mean, she also really loved QuickBooks, so she was keeping good financial records, but really had a good photo documentary of, she was a flower farmer, so she wanted to take pictures as she went through the season, and then she can compare this year, this time last year, I was harvesting this many bouquets of whatever. And so for climate change purposes, it's really stark. When we have drought years, her yields are hugely down, which you can see in your financials, but also just the yields. And you need to adjust your pricing when that happens. And so how do you do that if you're not tracking? If you're a beginning farmer, you don't know what your yields are supposed to be. So it's like,
right.
You're just winging it. If you're not documenting these things from season to
Yeah.
season, you don't gain that knowledge over time. So I thought that was a really creative way of doing it.
Yeah, that's so smart, just taking photos and then you can, have some visual clues as to how many rows of spinach did I do? Did I space them closer together? Okay, how much closer together? How did that work out? That there's an app waiting to be created to help farmers
I
track
think
their.
it's probably out there
I think it's
already.
out there too. Boy, yes, there's
I'll
so many
start
of
I'll
them.
start hunting for it as we turn over to Patrick.
Well,
You
when we talk about the importance of records, that's I think, a nice segue into produce food safety. And um, a couple of general statements relative to scaling up and produce food safety. First of all farmers are expected to have in place safe production, handling, and transport practices to make sure that their crops are as safe as possible for consumers. And that's certainly a legal requirement from the standpoint of federal and state regulations, but it's also an ethical requirement. And it's a requirement that buyers are going to insist upon. Now, when buyers insist upon these practices in place, they insist upon documentation. And there are ways that well, okay, so we need to make a distinction here between government regulations and buyer requirements. And government regulations frequently are regulatory situations, and generally the USDA and the Food and Drug Administration are the applicable federal agencies, and frequently state agencies of various sorts have a role to play as well. But uh, farmers are expected to comply with these regulations. But then there's another arena, another area that farmers will be expected to focus on, and that frequently is what's called a third-party audit that is driven by a market. And markets in some cases may be satisfied with compliance with federal regulations, but in many cases, markets will have in place specific audits that they require their vendors, their farmers to comply with. And we'll talk more about that here in a moment. But I did want to say just a few things about federal requirements. And um, in recent years, we've seen a more of an emphasis on fresh produce and produce food safety, and obviously because of the response to foodborne illness outbreaks that have been traced back to fresh produce. And uh, granted, it's not just wholesale channels that can have issues here. Certainly, there can be issues related to local direct market sales, but from the standpoint of the impact of a foodborne illness outbreak, it's typically greater, uh, when it's associated with the wholesale channel. And so that, I think, is one of the reasons that we've seen these recent laws come down from Congress that are now administered by the Food and Drug Administration. And the one in particular the farmers will want to be thinking about is the Food Safety Modernization Act, and there's a number of parts to that. What we're going to talk about tonight is just one piece of that, and that's the produce safety rule. And basically, the produce safety rule is in place to help ensure that fresh produce, particularly produce that is commonly consumed raw, is produced in a safe fashion. And when I work with farmers, and as I mentioned, I've worked with hundreds of farmers from the standpoint of compliance with the produce safety rule, the question that always comes up, well, I know there's exclusions and exemptions. Do I need to be worried about these things? And when we think about an exclusion or an exemption, it's just an exclusion or an exemption from specific compliance. It doesn't mean that you're not concerned with growing and handling safe crops. And it's a mistake to think that you don't need to have in place these practices. Every farmer needs to have them in place, but it is, I think, helpful to understand if your farm is subject to the rule, and if it is, what do you need to do to comply with the rule? And there's basically three scenarios, and I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail here because there are excellent decision trees that the Food and Drug Administration has made available to help farms understand their position under the produce safety rule. And there's just fabulous resources available to help farmers to understand this, perhaps available through the Produce Safety Alliance, the national focused group that works with the produce safety rule, but also through state extensions, state departments of agriculture, and then other groups as well. that have expertise. So check with them if you have specific questions. But basically, the three scenarios: small scale farms. These farms may be eligible for an exemption from the rule. Uh, the kind of the guiding thing to consider here are produce sales, and if sales from a farmer less than $25,000 averaged over 3 years, and that's an amount that's been adjusted for inflation, then those farms are exempt, and they don't have to expect an inspection visit from their regulatory agency, and there are a number of records they're not required to keep. The second scenario, and most farms fall under this, most produce farms fall under this, is what's called the qualified exemption, and those are farms that are selling less than 500,000 in food sales, and at least half of those food sales are to what are called qualified end users, and that's either the person who's going to consume the crop, that would be the case at a farmer's market or a CSA, or to what are called retail food establishments or restaurants. And this includes a number of potential wholesale markets. This includes markets to, for example, most institutions. It includes sales to grocery stores and sales to restaurants. What it does not include would be sales to brokers, and in some cases, sales to food hubs and to auctions, food auctions, produce auctions. And so again, it's important to recognize that and to work through those scenarios with someone with expertise if you need help. And then the third scenario, of course, is that the farm would be subject to the produce safety rule. And what that means basically is that one person from that farm needs to attend a specialized food safety training. An example would be the Produce Safety Alliance 8-hour training. Excellent exercise, excellent investment in time. The farm would also be expected to keep a number of records, and the farm would be expected to document the level of their sales to again verify that they are indeed subject to the rules. So there are scenarios to consider, and there are I guess I don't want to use the word consequence, but as a farm considers moving into wholesale channels, definitely these things need to be considered. And then the second thing I wanted to just briefly mention is that most wholesale markets, the ones that Jennifer and I have mentioned, are going to have an expectation that a farm is growing crops under safe conditions and handling and transporting crops under safe conditions. And typically that means some sort of physical documentation. And the common way this is done is through the use of what's called a third-party audit. Basically, that's a third party that is contracted by the farm to come and inspect the farm, their practices, and the way that they handle produce. And essentially, a checklist is used, and if the farm has in place good agricultural practices, then the farm will pass the audit. There are a number of these. One is the GAPS program through USDA. There are others that are through private agencies, and some wholesale markets have developed their own in-house tools that are used for a third-party audit. Keep in mind that a third-party audit is voluntary on the part of the farm. Obviously, it's a requirement if the farm expects to sell through a market that requires that audit, but it's not the same thing as, for example, a produce safety rule inspection. That is something that's done to comply with a federal regulation. But those two things need to be considered. Another thing that needs to be considered strongly, well, actually two things. One is having in place a food safety plan for the farm. That's a requirement of most third-party audits, not a requirement of the produce safety rule, but still a really, really good idea. And the third is a verified traceability program, where a farmer can identify where crop was produced on the farm and where that crop went as it left the hands of the farmer. And so having a traceability plan in place and having a mock recall exercise at least annually are typically requirements for sales to wholesale channels. And Jennifer, again, I'd love to hear sort of real world input on these things. I tend to work within the sort of the regulatory framework, and I always enjoy hearing what's going on in the real world.
Yeah, thank you. I do. Yeah, one of the things that we do here at New Entry, we also, our staff are also trainers for the Produce Safety Alliance. And one of the things that we require of our farmers that sell to the Food Hub is that everybody take the PSA grower training just to have some basic exposure, excuse me, to what is what should they be thinking about on their farm and all the considerations. Can they start to develop a basic food safety plan? Excuse me. Or at least really, sorry, I don't know why I'm now. Something in the air that is in my throat. But yes, we definitely encourage all of our farmers to have at least that. And then we also are, we work with our state agency who can also provide a lot of food safety training and on-farm support and guidance from both an educational and regulatory perspective. So in Massachusetts, we have a program called the Commonwealth Quality Program, which is sort of a gap equivalent program that the state Department of Ag created. And they have a checklist as well that you can go through to make sure that all of your practices on the farm and your food safety plan and your standard operating procedures all align so that you can hopefully bring a fresh, high quality product to market. But I think, when FSMA first came out and things were happening in the space, people were very confused. There was a lot of, as things were developing and a lot of comment periods and a lot of rolling out, and then not sure like what was this going to mean for people. And then I think that what we've seen is a lot of the work that you're doing, Patrick, is a lot of education and a lot of opportunities for farmers to come together and understand what the requirements are going to be and to learn what, what's covered, what's not, what they need to do, how is this going to impact their operations, and and get some of the training that they need. So our extension program has made all of these workshops for free or very low cost to be able to get the materials and then provide the follow-up support so that people can start to, whether they're required to do something more formal or not, at least put together the outline of a food safety plan and make sure that they have all the components of sanitation and hygiene and good water quality and all the pieces that you need to put the foundations together for food safety.
Yeah, thank you.
It's difficult. As we were talking earlier, I think one of the challenges is, as beginning farmers and limited resource farmers, oftentimes you may not have all of the access to the resources that you need to put all the appropriate, safeguards in place. Not all of our farmers have access to porta potties and potable hand washing facilities at their farms because they're on leased land, and those are not facilities that are available. So they need to have a contingency plan, like what are you going to do if you how do you wash your hands? So we do a lot of make and take wash station setups where people can fill up a bucket and bring it to the farm and have a little foot pump and have their soap and water there, even if they don't have potable water on the farm. So just thinking about simple things that people can do to make sure that they are practicing good hygiene and good food safety practices, cleaning their bins and storing them in places where they can't have bird droppings and rodent pressure and things like that. Just very basic things that, even if you don't have full on, or floors, walls, and ceilings facilities, you can still do a lot on your farm to make sure that you're producing safe, quality food.
Right. And we've done a number of workshops with Springfield Community Gardens looking on various aspects of produce food safety and how they can be made accessible for farms of all scales. So you're exactly right. There are very creative ways that we can develop safe production and handling practices. I did want to mention a couple of other points. One is the importance of training for everyone involved on the farm. The produce safety rule requires one person on the farm to attend the mandatory training, but that person then has the responsibility to share that information with everyone who's working with produce. And then the final thing, and Jennifer, you really emphasized it nicely previously, but the importance of records and maintaining records. And especially if a farm is subject to the rule, the inspector is going to demand to see those records. In the case of a third-party audit, those records are equally important. So, and then again, heaven forbid, if there's ever a situation where, the produce that, is called into question from a farm, the records are the best defense that the farm has. So, there are multiple benefits to a good system of collecting and maintaining records.
And one of the things that we also have started doing, and I know this is kind of a lean farming practice that a lot of farmers are already doing, but we have all of our standard operating procedures, photos of what we're supposed to be doing in the wash pack station, spelled out, step 1, step 2, step 3, this is how you're supposed to, leave the, clean up after yourself, set up, clean up, sanitize, having all those things visual so that if it's not you as the farm owner, as you said, Patrick, if you're training your workers, sometimes we don't always know how different people learn and different learning styles. So visual reminders, written reminders, log books, having all those things accessible in the spaces that we're using and as reminders, I think is really important as well. Because it's one thing to do your annual audit and have somebody come and see you at one point in the year, but the rest of the time, are you putting into practice all the things that need to be happening on a regular basis is the key.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better. Thank you. Okay, well, I think that is a good introduction to produce food safety. So much more, and again, really encourage farmers who are considering scaling up to think about that PSA 8-hour training as an entry point to understanding food safety issues. So I guess, Anna, back to you.
Definitely. And thank you. I'm going to link actually the Springfield Community Gardens YouTube page in the chat because we have recorded. I mean, yes, you're not compelled legally to go through any special training or certification, but it's needed for your own purposes, and it's definitely needed if you're wanting to scale up to institutional sales. There are so many resources to help people out there besides just our free recordings that we've done. There are also additional, like you said, trainings through MU Extension. There has been a reimbursement program for food safety training, and I'll put this into the chat right now.
Yeah, I'll mention there is, we've been able to offer the trainings at no cost to Missouri residents. And we also have in place, one of the important things is understanding water quality. And we have in place now a program to offset the cost of water testing for produce growers. So, and you can have as many tests as you like in a year. So encourage farmers to test their water sources.
Absolutely. That's a big one. We know for sure. And if you're unsure about whether or not, you are exempt, there's, of course, a very easy tool from the Missouri Department of Agriculture. I'm putting that in the chat, and it'll be in the show notes as well. But you can click through a survey, and it can help you assess whether you're exempt or not. And then, if you're in the Springfield area, if you're around the Ozarks, we love inviting farmers out to the Springfield Community Garden farm sites. We use our sites as an educational tool so that we can show different types of pack sheds and different levels of high tunnels and coolers. And right now we have 3 very different farms that have different purposes and different levels of equipment. Some are more DIY, others are more state of the art. So if you're in our area, we definitely encourage you to come reach out. It's not hard to get a hold of us. You can contact us on SCG's website. But we really like networking with the new farmers in our area. And if you have more questions about whether scaling up to this level is right for you, like we have a lot of resources and people who have been around a while and can help advise. There's also a lot of value in just building your network of farmers and people who can help answer some of these questions you're stuck on. So that's a benefit to reaching out if you'd like. And I personally, in my role with SCG, I work with farmers to help bridge some of those gaps in education or financing. So we have a lot of financial resources, like if you decide you need to scale up and need a cooler or need a micro loan to help pay for other equipment that you need to scale up, like just know there are a lot of options for you. There are specific USDA loans that help with operations, storage, cooling. several different things for high tunnels, as we mentioned earlier. So I just encourage you to reach out. And this recording will also be added to our workshop playlist, so you can watch it again later. And what else? Yeah, that should go up quickly. And then tomorrow, we will have a couple additional guests for part 2 of this workshop series. We're inviting a couple food hub managers who we work with personally. One is from the Spring Creek Food Hub down in Arkansas, and the other is from the Kansas City Food Hub up in Kansas City. So we're going to be hearing from them a little bit about operations and how farmers should approach food hubs, who should approach food hubs, and what those relationships might look like. So come back tomorrow night, or where to catch the recording later. But we really appreciate you being here and asking questions and just being interested in becoming part of the local food system and making sure that we have successful operating farmers in our region, because the demand for local food is increasing. And that is a very, very good thing. And we want to be supportive of that. So thank you for joining us. And thanks again to our presenters. And we will see you guys tomorrow night.
Great. I just had one other quick thing, Anna, I put in the chat if you want to share that in the link as well. I just pulled the wholesale marketing right for me kind of self-assessment checklist from the baskets to pallets manual, and I thought that might be really helpful to digest everything that we talked about tonight. And it just has like, are you all these different questions, yes, no, or unsure. And if you're unsure, maybe there's like a little space in the checklist to create a little action plan for what information you might need to follow up on. So after this evening's work, that would be a little helpful tool to share with participants.
Absolutely. I have lots of follow-up resources that'll be in the show notes. So thank you guys.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
We'll see you tomorrow.